My name is Emma Carter, and I'm 34 years old. For as long as I can remember, I've been invisible in my own family. I grew up in suburban Boston in a home that looked perfect from the outside. White fences, maple trees, the smell of my mother's lavender candles drifting through the hall. But inside those walls, there was always an unspoken hierarchy. My parents, Robert and Sarah Carter, never said they had a favorite child. They didn't have to. Their actions said it all. That child was my younger sister, Lily. When Lily was born, I was 8. Everyone called her a miracle baby. I was told to be patient because she needed more attention, then be understanding because she was still young, and eventually be proud because she was doing her best. By the time I was old enough to understand, be understanding had turned into my life's role. I remember the first time I realized I didn't matter. It was the day I won first place in the 6th grade science fair. I had spent 2 months building a working model of the solar system, complete with moving planets powered by a hand-wound motor. The judges called my project exceptional. My parents promised they'd be there. But when I looked out at the audience, all I saw were empty seats. Later that night, they told me Lily had a school choir rehearsal. They couldn't miss it, she was just so nervous. They said they'd make it up to me. They didn't. My trophy sat unopened on the mantel for a week before disappearing entirely. Years later, I found it in a box of Christmas decorations half broken. That pattern continued into everything. When Lily brought home a most improved ribbon from gymnastics, it went up on the living room wall. When I was awarded valedictorian of my graduating class, my parents missed my speech because Lily had been feeling a little down and they wanted to cheer her up with ice cream. Even at 18, the message was clear. I wasn't the daughter who needed love, I was the one expected to give it. By then, I had stopped expecting praise. Instead, I learned to work quietly to bury myself in logic numbers, things that made sense. And that's how I got a partial scholarship to MIT, something I barely mentioned at dinner, because I knew what would follow. MIT. That's great, honey, my mother said, half smiling before turning to my father. Did you hear Lily's thinking of trying out for the debate team? That was it. That was the moment I decided I would never rely on them again. When I left for college, I imagined my parents might finally see me as an adult, independent, capable, but they didn't even help me unpack my dorm. Dad said he had to get Lily to her soccer game before traffic got bad. I remember watching their car pull away its taillights disappearing down the street and realizing I was officially on my own. At MIT, I finally felt free. No comparisons, no constant measuring against my sister. Professors treated me like I mattered. My projects spoke louder than my last name. I worked nights at a cafe, took coding contracts, and lived in a tiny dorm room with a view of the Charles River. I felt small, but not unseen. For the first time in my life, I wasn't Lily's sister. I was Emma Carter, the woman who made things work. After graduation, I took a job in a Boston tech firm. Within 5 years, I became the youngest senior software engineer in the company's history. I'd built a life defined by effort, not luck, a life that was mine. But even then, I couldn't completely escape the echo of home. When I called to share my promotion, my mother's response was, "Oh, that's nice, sweetie. Did you know Lily might move in with her boyfriend soon?" Every success of mine seemed to be followed by one of Lily's potential successes, and somehow hers always mattered more. Still, I tried to convince myself I didn't need their approval, that I could build a future without ever hearing "we're proud of you." But late at night, when the apartment lights were low and the city outside felt too big, I still wondered what it might feel like to be someone's favorite. Maybe that's why when I met Ethan, I fell so hard. He wasn't like anyone I'd known. He noticed small things, how I stirred my coffee counterclockwise, how I tucked my hair behind my ear when I was thinking. We met at a tiny cafe near my office where he worked part-time while finishing his teaching degree. He remembered every customer's order. Mine was a double espresso with 1 sugar. For months, I never realized that the little notes written on my cup, "You're stronger than you think," were from him. When I finally did and looked up to see him smiling nervously, I felt something inside me shift. Someone saw me. Not as Lily's sister, not as the quiet girl from Boston, just me. We spent hours talking that first night about everything from philosophy to bad reality TV. He listened to my childhood stories without judgment, just quiet empathy. When I told him how my parents used to skip my ceremonies for Lily's recitals, he said something that stayed with me. Some people are too blind to see what's right in front of them. But I see you, Emma. I do. For the first time, I believed it. The following year was a dream. We built a life that was ours. cooking elaborate dinners on Friday nights, spending weekends exploring bookstores, whispering plans for the future. He was patient, kind, and completely different from the chaos I grew up with. And when he proposed down on one knee in the middle of that same cafe where we met, I didn't hesitate. I said yes before he even finished the question. I thought I'd finally escaped my family's shadow, but even on my wedding day, they found a way to remind me where I stood. During the reception, my mother spent half the evening talking about Lily's new job opportunity in California. My father even interrupted Ethan's father's toast to share a funny story about Lily's first driving lesson. Ethan laughed politely. I smiled tightly, because that's what I'd been trained to do, smile through the hurt. I should have seen it as a warning. But Ethan squeezed my hand and whispered, "Don't mind them. They'll come around eventually." And for a moment I believed him. I believed that love could fix what family had broken. I believed that I'd finally built a world where I belonged. I believed wrong. The first year of marriage felt like something out of a quiet dream. Ethan and I had moved into a cozy condo in Cambridge, not far from my office. We filled it with things that had meaning. A bookshelf we built together, plants that refused to die, despite our inconsistent watering framed photos from every weekend trip we took. It was the kind of home I'd always wanted, warm, safe ours, the kind I'd never known growing up. Ethan would wait for me to come home from late nights at the office, always with dinner waiting, always asking rough day before I even had to answer. I wasn't used to that kind of tenderness. He'd listen to my frustrations about work, about my parents' latest guilt trips, and somehow make me laugh again. He used to say, "You overthink everything except love. That's what I adore about you." I used to think that was a compliment. Now I realize it was foreshadowing. Despite our different backgrounds, Ethan understood what it meant to grow up feeling unseen. His father had left early, his mother raised him alone, and for years he'd worked his way through school. Maybe that's why I felt safe with him. We both knew what it was like to build from nothing. My parents, of course, barely paid attention to the wedding photos I mailed them. When I called to tell them, Ethan had been offered a teaching position at a private school. My mother's first words were, "That's nice, dear. Lily just got promoted to assistant manager." It was almost funny how predictable it all was. Almost. Ethan would try to cheer me up by saying, "You don't need their validation, Emma. You built yourself." He was right. I knew it. But deep down, there was still that little girl inside me waiting for someone to clap for her, anyone. We spent 3 peaceful years that way. Lazy Sunday mornings, spontaneous road trips, quiet evenings where the world shrank to just us and the sound of rain against the windows. It wasn't perfect, but it was stable. And for a woman who'd grown up in chaos, stability felt like magic. Still, life has a way of introducing cracks as slowly, so slowly, that you almost mistake them for reflections. It started with a message from Lily. After years of barely speaking, she sent me a photo of herself on a beach in California with the caption, "Miss you, M. Thinking of coming home soon. We should catch up." Ethan looked at the message over my shoulder and smiled. "That's nice. Maybe she's changed." I remember laughing, saying, "You don't know Lily." He grinned back. "Then maybe I should." I should have listened to my instincts then, but Ethan always had that effect on people. He made you believe the best in them. When Lily returned to Boston, she looked different. Confident, charming, radiant in that effortless way that drew attention without asking for it. At first, it felt good to reconnect. We had dinners together, laughed about childhood stories, even visited our parents as a trio, something that hadn't happened in years. Lily had this way of disarming people. Within minutes of meeting her, Ethan was laughing like they'd known each other forever. She teased him about his outdated playlists, he joked about her love for pineapple pizza, and I foolishly felt proud. For once, my sister and my husband got along. Maybe this was what a healed family looked like. But small things began to change. It started when I'd come home late and find Ethan and Lily still talking in the living room, wine glasses half full, some movie paused mid-scene. They'd say, "We were just catching up." And I'd force a smile, ignoring the strange silence that followed me into the room. Then there were the jokes, little inside references I didn't understand, moments of eye contact that lasted a second too long, the kind of details you only notice when your heart already knows something's off. One night I came home early from a client dinner. The house was dark except for the soft glow from the kitchen. I heard laughter, hers high and melodic, his deeper but familiar. I paused outside the doorway, watching them from the hall. Lily was sitting on the counter barefoot, swinging her legs while Ethan stirred something on the stove. She dipped a finger into the sauce and teased, "Needs more salt." He laughed and brushed her hand away playfully. It looked innocent, almost too innocent. They didn't see me at first. When they did, both froze just for a second before acting like nothing had happened. I brushed it off. I wanted to brush it off, because the alternative, that history was repeating itself, was too painful to consider. A few weeks later, Lily announced over dinner that she was moving into a small apartment nearby. "Ethan helped me find it," she said, smiling. He nodded. "Yeah, I just sent her a few listings." I told myself it was kindness, nothing more. But when Lily started dropping by unexpectedly sometimes when I was still at work, the unease grew louder. I'd find her favorite coffee mug in the sink, her perfume lingering in the hallway. Ethan would insist she just needed to talk. "You know how your sister gets." Yes, I knew exactly how my sister got. It all came to a head one night in early spring. We were sitting at the dinner table, Ethan, Lily, and me, eating takeout Thai food. The air felt heavy, charged with something unspoken. Lily set down her fork, looked at me, and said, "I have some news." She smiled nervously, then rested a hand on her stomach. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My eyes flicked to Ethan, expecting surprise, confusion, something. But he didn't look shocked. He just stared down at his plate, his jaw tightening. The silence stretched too long. My mind tried to make sense of it, to cling to any explanation that wasn't the one clawing at my gut. "Congratulations," I finally said, forcing the words out. But even as they left my mouth, something inside me cracked. Because Ethan's eyes, when he finally met mine, held a flicker of guilt, a small fleeting shadow that told me everything I needed to know. That night, as I lay awake, listening to the sound of his breathing beside me, I realized I wasn't imagining things. Something real, something unforgivable was hiding just beneath the surface. And the worst part, I could feel it waiting to be discovered. Patient, poisonous, like a secret that already knew how it would destroy me. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the way Ethan had looked at Lily, not like a friend, not even like a brother-in-law. It was something else, something that made my skin crawl. By morning, I had convinced myself I was overreacting, that exhaustion was making me paranoid, that it was just a coincidence the way his voice softened when he spoke her name, the way she laughed at his jokes as if he were the only man in the room. Denial can be a beautiful, dangerous thing. It lets you breathe until it doesn't. For a few weeks, I tried to live as if nothing had changed. Ethan left earlier for work than usual. Lily stopped answering my texts right away. And our parents suddenly began calling me more often, which, coming from them, was suspicious enough. One afternoon, my mother left me a voicemail that made my blood run cold. She said, "Emma, you need to be there for your sister. She's going through something delicate. Please be understanding for once." For once. The same phrase I'd heard my entire life used like a leash to keep me compliant. I drove straight to Lily's apartment after work. When I knocked, it took her longer than usual to answer. When she did, she looked tired. Pale hair, messy eyes swollen from crying. For a split second, my heart softened. Then I noticed something behind her, a man's jacket hanging on the back of the chair. Ethan's jacket. "Is Ethan here?" I asked. She hesitated, then shook her head. "He was, earlier. He just came by to drop off something for me." Something I repeated, glancing at the half-finished mug of coffee on her counter, the kind Ethan always made. Lily folded her arms. "Don't start, Emma. I know what you're thinking." "Do you?" I asked quietly. Because even I wasn't sure what I was thinking anymore. My mind was a blur of anger and disbelief colliding so fast that it almost felt numb. That night I confronted Ethan. He didn't even look surprised. He sighed, ran a hand through his hair, and said, "She's your sister. She's been struggling. I was just trying to help." Help with what he didn't answer. "Ethan, if you're hiding something." "I'm not." His voice snapped, too sharp, too defensive. "God, Emma, not everything is a conspiracy." I stared at him. "Then why do you sound guilty?" He turned away, muttering, "Because you're accusing me of something awful." But what I didn't say, what stuck in my throat like glass, was that I didn't need to accuse him. His silence was confession enough. Days passed, and the atmosphere between us thickened. Every word became careful, rehearsed. Every touch felt foreign. I started keeping my phone beside me, watching it light up with messages I wasn't allowed to see. And then came the night that shattered the last illusion. It was late. Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch, his phone still in his hand. Normally, I wouldn't touch it. I'd always believed that love didn't need surveillance. But that night, something stronger than fear guided me. A quiet, shaking instinct that whispered, "Look." My fingers were trembling as I unlocked his phone. The first message was from Lily. "I can still smell you on me." My breath caught. The next one, "We'll tell her after the baby's born. She'll forgive us when she sees how happy we are." There were hundreds more. Photos, hotel bookings, notes exchanged while I was at work. each one stabbing a new hole in the version of reality I'd been living. By the time I reached the message where she wrote, "He kicked this morning. I wish you'd been here to feel it. I couldn't see through my tears anymore." My hands went cold. My heart stopped feeling like a heart, just an echo beating out of obligation. I dropped the phone and stared at it lying on the carpet. The silence in that room was deafening. When Ethan woke up, I was still sitting there on the floor, the phone beside me. He froze when he saw it. For a long, unbearable second, we just stared at each other. Then he whispered, "Emma, Don't," I said, my voice shaking. "Don't you dare." He looked down ashamed, but not enough to erase what he'd done. I wanted to scream, to throw things to make him feel even a fraction of what was tearing through me. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. Was it worth it? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because in that silence, I finally understood everything. Every late night, every lie, I was just helping. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. I don't know why I expected support. Maybe because some part of me still believed in the idea of family. But when I showed them the messages, my mother's first words were, "Oh, Emma, you can't blame Lily. These things happen." I laughed a sound that didn't even feel human. "She slept with my husband, Mom." My father just sighed. "He's going to be a father now. You have to think about the baby." The baby, their grandchild, not my pain, not my betrayal, just a new role for them to play doting grandparents to the child conceived from deceit. "You expect me to forgive them?" I asked. "You're the older one," my mother said softly. "You should be mature enough to understand." I stared at her for a long time until something inside me finally died, the last thread of wanting to be loved by them. "I understand perfectly," I said. "You never cared who hurt me, as long as it wasn't Lily." And then I walked out. I didn't cry until I was in the car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. By the time I reached home, Ethan's things were already gone. A note on the counter read, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen." But he did. They both did. That night, I packed a small suitcase, left my wedding ring on the table, and booked a hotel. I filed for divorce the next morning. For once in my life, I didn't ask anyone for permission. I didn't try to understand. I didn't look back. Because some betrayals don't deserve closure, only distance. As I closed the door of that hotel room behind me, I made a silent promise I would never again let anyone convince me that love requires suffering. But I had no idea the suffering wasn't over yet. They hadn't just betrayed me. They were about to come for everything else I had left. After the divorce papers were filed, I thought the worst was over. Naively, I believed that walking away would mean peace. But betrayal has a way of lingering not just in memory, but in the way people look at you, whisper about you, and rewrite your story without permission. The first few weeks felt like trying to breathe underwater. I moved into a small apartment in Somerville, just a few miles from the condo I once shared with Ethan. Everything about it was temporary. The furniture was minimal, the walls bare, but it was mine. No ghosts, no expectations. Work became my sanctuary. I buried myself in late-night coding sessions, projects, and silence. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the office window, tired eyes. No makeup, a woman trying to remember who she was before everyone decided for her. But healing isn't linear. Some days I almost felt normal. Other days I'd find myself staring at old photos I should have deleted the wedding, the birthdays, the smiles that now felt like lies. And then the phone calls started. At first they were from unknown numbers. I ignored them. Then came the messages, guilt-laced, manipulative, relentless. "Ethan's struggling. He lost his job. Lily isn't doing well. You should talk to her. You're her sister, Emma. Be the bigger person." All signed with love from Mom. It didn't take long before my parents started showing up unannounced. Once my mother left groceries outside my apartment with a note that said, "For Lily. Please drop them off. She's too proud to ask." Too proud. That was rich, coming from the woman who never missed a chance to tell me I was cold for refusing to help. One evening, as I left the office, I found Lily waiting near the parking lot. She looked smaller, her belly showing under an oversized coat, her hair unkempt, her smile trembling. "Emma," she said softly, "can we talk?" I should have walked away, but I didn't. She began crying before she even spoke. "Ethan left. He said he needed time. I don't know what to do." There it was, the trap disguised as tragedy. For a brief second, pity almost crept in. But then I remembered the text messages, the laughter, the secrecy. "You should have thought about that before you destroyed my life," I said quietly. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she sobbed. "I was lonely. You were always so perfect." I laughed bitterly. Perfect. "You took everything I had, Lily. And now you want sympathy? Her tears stopped as quickly as they started. Her face hardened. You've always been selfish, Emma. Mom and Dad were right. You only think about yourself. Right, I said, stepping back. And you only think about what's yours to take. I walked away, her voice echoing behind me. You'll regret this when the baby's born. But I didn't look back. For once, I didn't owe her my compassion. A few days later, I got an email, not from her, but from Ethan. It was short, cold, businesslike. We need to talk about financial support. Lily's pregnancy has complications. It's not about us anymore, it's about the baby. The audacity of it made my hands shake. I read it twice then, 3 times, trying to make sense of how a man who had shattered my world could dare to ask for my help to raise the child that proved his betrayal. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the email to my lawyer. That's when things turned from pathetic to sinister. My company's receptionist messaged me one morning. Your mother's here. Says it's urgent. I thought it was a bad joke. It wasn't. When I went down to the lobby, she was sitting there calm, composed, wearing her favorite pearl earrings, the ones she always saved for family events. Mom, you can't come here, I said, keeping my voice low. This is my workplace. She smiled like we were meeting for coffee. Then I'll keep it brief. Her tone was rehearsed, like she'd been practicing this speech for days. Your sister's situation is serious. Ethan's lost his job. The baby needs medical care. Your father and I are helping as much as we can, but our savings are nearly gone. It's time you step up. Step up, I repeated, incredulous. You mean pay for the people who betrayed me? She frowned, as if I'd missed the point. Emma, you've always been the strong one, the responsible one. You can afford it. And they can't afford honesty, I snapped. So no, I won't. Her voice sharpened. Don't you have any compassion left? This isn't who I raised you to be. I met her gaze and said, No, Mom. This is exactly who you raised me to be, the one who fixes everyone else's messes. Only now I'm done. I turned and walked away, leaving her sitting in the lobby, pretending to look heartbroken while people stared. By the time I got back upstairs, my hands were shaking, but not from fear, from relief. For the first time, I had said no and meant it, but it didn't end there. That evening, I opened my inbox to find another message, this time from Ethan again. He'd made a new account to get past my blocks. We never meant to hurt you. Please understand Lily's scared. We don't have anywhere else to go. She needs your help. Attached was a sonogram photo, black and white, with the caption, Your niece or nephew. It was the lowest kind of manipulation, using the unborn child as a weapon. But what struck me wasn't the image, it was the date. The scan had been taken 6 months before I discovered their affair. They had known, they had planned it, and they still smiled in my face like nothing had happened. That night, I printed the email and the sonogram, folded them neatly, and placed them in a folder marked Evidence. My lawyer had warned me, desperate people do desperate things. She was right, because within a week, I was served with a legal notice. Lily and Ethan were suing me, claiming emotional damages, financial distress, and moral support obligations due to shared familial responsibilities. In simpler terms, they wanted my money. They wanted to profit from the destruction they'd caused. I laughed when I read it, then I cried, because deep down I realized something horrifying. They didn't see me as family anymore. They saw me as their solution, and I was about to show them how wrong they were. The day of the hearing felt unreal, like walking into a bad dream I couldn't wake from. I sat in the courtroom, hands clasped, pulse pounding. Across from me sat the 2 people who had once been my entire world. Ethan in a suit that didn't quite fit, and Lily, her stomach round beneath a pale dress, eyes rimmed with fake tears. Behind them, my parents sat proudly like spectators at some family reunion from hell. It wasn't grief I felt, it was disgust. At them. At myself for ever believing any of them could change. Their lawyer began with a story so twisted it almost made me laugh. He painted Ethan and Lily as victims of my emotional cruelty. He said I'd abandoned Lily in her time of need, that I'd humiliated her publicly, that my refusal to forgive had caused irreparable stress to her pregnancy. I could feel every pair of eyes in the room turning toward me. Strangers, jurors, even the judge waiting to see what kind of woman could do such things. When it was my lawyer's turn, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She stood calm and deliberate and said, Your Honor, we'd like to submit evidence of ongoing harassment, defamation, and manipulation against my client, Ms. Carter. Then she played the first video. Security footage from my office building flickered onto the screen. There was my mother in the lobby, refusing to leave, loudly berating the receptionist. There was Ethan trying to follow me into the building weeks after I'd blocked him, shouting my name until security dragged him out. And there unmistakably was Lily attempting to slip in through the back entrance with a set of keys she'd stolen. The courtroom was silent. Then came the emails. Dozens of them. All from Ethan and Lily, alternating between apologies and emotional blackmail. Then the social media posts, Lily's vague claims of abandonment, Ethan's comments about heartless people who don't know family, and finally the financial records. That was the real turning point. My lawyer projected them onto the screen one by one, Ethan's repeated job rejections, not because of me, but because he'd turned down every position that paid less than what he deserved. Lily's medical expenses showing an uncomplicated pregnancy and full insurance coverage. A screenshot of her messages to a friend bragging that she'd get something out of Emma eventually. The judge's expression shifted from mild boredom to anger. He looked at their lawyer and said, "Counselor, do you wish to proceed with this claim?" The man stammered, whispering frantically with Ethan. Before he could respond, Lily broke down, not with guilt, but with panic. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she cried. "We just needed help." The judge slammed his gavel once sharp and final. "Help is not extortion, Ms. Carter. This case is dismissed. And considering the evidence of harassment, I'm reducing the alimony order by 60%. It was over, just like that. But the silence that followed didn't feel like victory. It felt like ashes. Ethan wouldn't look at me. Lily was sobbing into my mother's shoulder. My father sat there pale and furious, muttering under his breath. As we left the courtroom, my mother turned to me and hissed, "How could you do this to your sister?" I stopped. For the first time, I looked her straight in the eye and said, "No, Mom, the question is, how could you?" Then I walked away not just from her, from all of them. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift and merciless. Lily and Ethan's reputations were in ruins. My parents' finances collapsed under the weight of the legal fees and the money they'd spent bailing them out. Mutual friends stopped replying to their posts. Even distant relatives reached out to me privately, apologizing for believing the lies. But none of that made me happy. There was no satisfaction in watching them unravel, only an odd, empty clarity, the kind that comes after a storm when all that's left standing is the truth. I met with my lawyer one last time. She handed me a file and said, "Congratulations, you're free now." Free. It sounded almost foreign. I had spent so many years trying to be the good daughter, the forgiving sister, the patient wife. And in that moment, I realized forgiveness had been the chain around my neck all along. I didn't owe anyone peace at the cost of my own. One evening, I sat alone on my apartment balcony watching the sun dip behind the skyline. Below the city buzzed cars, laughter music, life going on as if mine hadn't been torn apart. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt something quieter, acceptance. They'd taken everything I thought I needed, family, marriage, belonging. But in their absence, I'd found something better myself. The next morning, I received a call from a recruiter in Seattle. A senior position, double the pay, relocation covered. When I hung up, I realized I was smiling. Not the forced smile I'd perfected growing up, but a real one. It was time to start over. But before I could, there was one last thing I needed to do. That night, I drove back to my old condo. The lights were off, the windows dark. I slipped the spare key, the last link to that life, into an envelope, sealed it, and left it on the doorstep. Inside the envelope was a short note. "Your choices brought you here. I'm done cleaning up after them." As I turned to leave, a gust of wind carried the scent of lilacs, my mother's favorite. For a second, I almost faltered. Then I remembered what she'd said after the affair, "You should be mature enough to understand." Now I finally did. Understanding didn't mean forgiveness. It meant freedom. When I got home, I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window. The city lights flickered against the glass like tiny stars. I raised my glass to no one in particular and whispered, "To peace, to finally choosing myself." And for the first time in my life, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sacred. The morning I left Boston was cold and clear. I watched the city skyline disappear in my rearview mirror, the sunlight bouncing off the glass towers like shards of memory. Each mile I drove felt like peeling away another layer of the life that had buried me. I didn't play music. I didn't need to. The silence itself felt like a song, steady, calm, and completely mine. When I arrived in Seattle, the air was different, damp, green, alive. The company had arranged a furnished apartment downtown, but what struck me most wasn't the view or the skyline. It was the quiet. No one here knew me as the older sister. No one knew the story of betrayal and lawsuits and family politics. I was just Emma Carter, senior software architect. No footnotes, no shame. The first night, I stood on the balcony watching the rain fall in soft sheets over the city. Somewhere below, someone was playing jazz on a saxophone, the sound echoing faintly through the street. That's when I realized peace has a sound, and I was hearing it for the first time. The days blurred gently after that. Work came easily. The people were kind, curious, and unburdened by gossip. They respected me for what I did not, who I disappointed. Sometimes after late nights at the office, I'd take long walks near the waterfront. The salt air would sting my cheeks, and I'd breathe in deeply, not to remember, but to remind myself that I'd survived, that I'd built something new, something no one could take. And yet the ghosts found their way back, as they always do. A few weeks after I'd settled in, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months, Aunt Clara. My father's sister. The reasonable one. The one who always said she stayed neutral. For a long moment, I stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. Then, against my better judgment, I did. Her voice was honeyed at first. Emma. Sweetheart. How are you? I heard about the move, Seattle. How exciting. I waited. Because people like her never call without a reason. And there it was, right on cue. She sighed, the sound rehearsed. Your father's not doing well. The stress has really taken a toll on him. And your mother, she cries every night. They might have to sell the house. I stayed silent, watching raindrops crawl down the window. They made mistakes, she continued softly. But they're your parents. Family is family. Don't you think it's time to put the past behind you? Something in me cracked, not with anger, but with clarity. For years, this had been the language of my family. Guilt wrapped in affection, shame disguised as love. I said quietly, Aunt Clara, do you know what it's like to be betrayed by everyone you've ever trusted? She hesitated. They were wrong, yes, but... No, I interrupted. You don't get to butt betrayal. Not when they watched me drown and called it family. There was a pause, long and heavy. Then she whispered, You'll regret this someday, Emma. When you're older and alone, you'll see that family is all we have. I smiled faintly. No, Aunt Clara. Self-respect is all we have, and I'm finally keeping mine. Then I ended the call. That night, I sat at my desk and began writing not code this time, but a letter. Not to send, but to release. It started simply, to the people who taught me everything I don't want to be. I wrote about being invisible as a child, about the way they'd chosen Lily again and again, about Ethan's betrayal, and how in their eyes it was somehow my fault for not being understanding. And then at the end I wrote, You don't get to define me anymore. I'm not your scapegoat, your crutch, or your wallet. I'm done being the afterthought in my own story. When I finished, I folded the letter and burned it in a small ceramic bowl by the window. The ashes curled and rose like black petals into the night air. It felt like a funeral and a rebirth. A few months later, I learned through an old coworker that Lily had given birth, a baby boy, healthy, beautiful, and Ethan wasn't around anymore. Apparently, he'd walked out after the court case, too humiliated to stay. My parents were helping her raise the baby, draining what little they had left. The same cycle of protection and denial replaying itself like an old song. I didn't feel joy at their downfall. I didn't feel pity either. Just distance, the calm of knowing it wasn't my burden anymore. One rainy Saturday, as I unpacked boxes in my Seattle apartment, I found something wedged between two books, an old photo of Lily and me as children. We were sitting in the backyard, her head on my shoulder, both of us laughing about something I couldn't remember. For a second, I wanted to feel nostalgia, but I couldn't. The past was gone, and I wasn't going back for it. I slipped the photo into a drawer, not thrown away, just stored, a relic of who I used to be. That evening, my coworkers threw a small gathering at a rooftop bar to welcome me officially. As the city lights blinked below and the Space Needle glowed in the distance, someone raised a toast. To new beginnings, they said. I lifted my glass, smiling, really smiling. To freedom, I replied, and to never apologizing for choosing it. Later, walking home through the drizzle, I caught my reflection in a store window. Same face, same eyes. But lighter somehow, like the weight that had followed me my entire life, had finally dissolved into the fog. For the first time, I didn't feel like the forgotten daughter or the betrayed wife. I felt like someone who'd survived and built a life out of the ruins. At a red light, I looked up at the night sky, faint stars behind the city glow, and whispered to myself, I'm not running anymore. I'm finally going home. The light turned green. I crossed the street. and the rain, steady and cleansing, fell like applause.